Jon remembered the first time he ever heard talk of Rhaegar Targaryen, as a boy of perhaps 7, sitting on the cold stones of Winterfell's yard. Old Nan had been spinning one of her endless tales about knights and wars of dragons. She described Rhaegar as a prince of spectral beauty, a man said to have a light in his eyes and a harp in his hands. It had caught Jon's young imagination that someone who was a warrior could be a poet too. Even so, he had never paid much attention to the talk of Targaryen dragons, for to him they had always been creatures lost to time. It was easier to envision White Walkers and the terrors in the far north than to picture living, fiery beasts. Only years later, after all that had transpired, Ned Stark's death, his own journey to the Wall, the war for the Dawn, did he start to feel the weight of Targaryen rumor and wonder if perhaps some bits of those old stories might be more than fable. He was older now, the scars of loss and victory scored across his mind and soul, and his station in the world stood on fragile ground. The War of the Five Kings had long ended in ways no one could have predicted. Daenerys Targaryen had flown across the sea, and yet her arrival, her dragons, had not brought the neat resolution some might have expected. Kings and queens rose and fell like flickering candles in a drafty hall. Jon had found out his true parentage not through the gentle disclosure of a trusted friend, but in that swirl of chaos when secrets demanded to be revealed. Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, two names he had known only in passing, were his real mother and father. The significance of this revelation was crushing, almost maddening, as though the entire world tilted on some hidden axis that left him reeling. But time marched on, unrelenting, and so must he. Winter had ended. The snows were diminishing day by day in the north, receding up into the high mountains, and the realms were rebuilding. Jon found himself returning to Winterfell as a man caught between two heritages, unsure of whether to call himself a Stark or a Targaryen, and uncertain what either really meant anymore. He had not renounced his oath to the Night's Watch lightly, but that oath was sundered when the Watch itself was nearly destroyed by the storms of war and the onslaught of the dead. With the others vanquished, Jon had found himself in a unique and uneasy position. Claimed by many as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, though he had no taste for crown, Daenerys had left Westeros for Essos once more, to attempt a more permanent peace across the narrow sea, leaving behind only one of her dragons, Drogon, perched somewhere distant. Rhaegal and Viserion had perished in the wars. Drogon flew still, but was as elusive and changeable as the deserts of Essos themselves. So, ironically, Jon felt as though the dragons were once more mostly myth, only tangentially connected to his life. He never wished to ride one, never wished to harness such destructive power. He wanted only, if possible, to find some measure of peace. Yet an unease clung to the realm. Word drifted on the wind of strange sightings near the storm-lashed coasts of the narrow sea. Rumors of a scaled beast cutting across the moonlit sky. The rumors spoke not of Drogon, large and black, but of a dragon of burnished silver, slender and swift. Some said it was only the moonlight reflecting off a black hide. Others whispered that another dragon might have survived somewhere, slumbering in stasis, awakened by the tumult of magic that rose when the dead came south. Jon paid these rumors little mind until he received a raven from Tarth, bearing Sir Brienne's name. She wrote of her journey to the Sapphire Isles' remote eastern shore, of how villagers claimed to see something shining in the sky, so briefly that many believed it was a trick of the night. But she could not banish from her mind what she had glimpsed. A shape with wings wide as a great warship's sails, with a slender, elongated body that shone like the reflection of a silver coin in a dark pool. Jon paced by the windows of the great keep with that letter in his hand. He remembered Brienne's unwavering honor, how she had nearly died defending him once. Now she told him that these tales were not so easily dismissed. If it were another dragon, or some twisted spawn of the others, though the others had been ended, or so they believed, it was a matter of grave importance. The letter called him south, requesting his eyes, his presence, and the weight of his Targaryen blood, to parse truth from illusion. Jon tried to ignore the summons for a span of days, burying himself in the management of Winterfell's storerooms, and the forging of alliances between northern lords who had begun to bicker among themselves once the common threat vanished. But the letter burned at him as bright as any hearth fire on a cold night. Its words lit an ember in his chest, and soon he could abide no more hesitation. He departed in the company of a small retinue. Men and women who believed in him not as a Targaryen king but as Jon, the man they had come to respect and follow. Ghost trotted at his side, fur still as white as snow, eyes keen and watchful, the direwolf an enduring symbol of his stark blood. But inside Jon's heart, he felt the call of something else. He could not deny the creeping sense that he was responding to more than Brienne's letter. Perhaps, in some unspoken corner of his mind, he hoped to glean answers about the father he had never known. The journey south was long and fraught with the usual difficulties of travel in the Seven Kingdoms. Roads torn by war, villages recovering slowly, bandits opportunistic as ever. Yet it lacked the teeth of winter's wrath. The skies stayed mild, the forests turning from their stark winter shade to the lively greens of early spring. When he passed through the riverlands, he found once devastated towns rising from the ashes, men building new walls, women replanting fields. He greeted them as best he could, always uncomfortable with the calls of "my lord" or "your grace" from the small folk who recognized him or had simply heard stories. He had no crown, no official decree, but stories travel quickly, and to many the name Targaryen was once again a light in memory thanks to Daenerys. Whenever someone mentioned dragons in hushed reverence, Jon's heart gave a queer twist, a mixture of dread and reluctant curiosity. Arriving at the coast of Tarth, Jon was greeted by Ser Brienne in person. She had grown somewhat older, a faint scattering of silver at her temples, but her posture was as rigid with honor as ever, and her gaze was just as steadfast. She bowed, ever so slightly, and parted her lips to greet him. But before words passed between them, she searched his face, as though seeking assurance that he was still the same man who once believed in her unwavering fidelity to her vows. He responded by placing a hand on her armored forearm, and in a voice tempered by time he said, "I came as soon as I could." That, he knew, was all she needed. She nodded, leading him and his retinue to a keep near the eastern shore, where they might share the details of the sightings. Night had fallen by the time they settled near a hearth. The flicker of firelight danced over the maps laid out upon a heavy oak table. Brienne traced a line with a gloved finger, showing the approximate areas where the people had sighted the strange creature. Most accounts referred to it as a flicker of bright scales in the moonlight, always near the coastline, seldom straying inland. No sheep or livestock had been taken, or if they had, no more so than typical predators might. Yet fishermen returned with wild tales of seeing a long, sinuous figure over the waves, leaving phosphorescent wakes behind, as though the dragon might be skimming the water. Jon found himself silent, listening intently, glancing over the scroll of places and times. If indeed there was a living dragon out here, one that had not been birthed by Daenerys' known brood, from whence had it come? "There was talk long ago," Brienne said, her voice quiet and measured, "that not all Targaryen dragons died at the same time. There are rumors of eggs hidden in the Red Keep, secret clutches scattered across the Seven Kingdoms, unhatched or lost in the catacombs of ancient castles, but none I ever heard of were fully grown." Her eyes lingered on Jon's face, just for an instant. It said Rhaegar was close to discovering new knowledge of dragons before his untimely end at the Trident. But rumor is rumor. If you had not come, I would not know who else to trust to truly see if these sightings were real. Jon nodded, feeling the press of destiny coil around him like a serpent, though he fought to resist it. He was not the boy who yearned to be special. He wanted only the truth. "We'll ride out in the morning," he said. "The local fisherfolk might know more. We'll question them. But if it's truly a dragon, we need to know its temperament, whether it's wild or cunning, or if it's somehow waiting for a Targaryen hand to guide it." "Anyhow." Brienne's gaze was solemn. "Be careful, my friend. Dragons are not dogs to be tamed." He offered a faint tilt of his head, acknowledging her warning. "I've seen the damage they can do. I also know how fiercely loyal they can be if a bond is forged. But that's Daenerys' doing, not mine. I'm no dragon rider." They left it at that, and parted for the night. Jon found himself in a modest chamber in that half-restored keep, lying awake on a bed that smelled of musty straw. The night breeze ruffled the loose shutters, carrying the tang of salt. Ghost curled up on the floor near the door, ever watchful. Jon stared at the rafters, letting his mind wander to the father he knew only through the recollections of others. Rhaegar Targaryen, a man who fought for what he believed in, who ignited a war that ended in tragedy, who died at the Trident. Jon had once wanted to dismiss him as a phantom or a villain, but time and knowledge had softened those harsh judgments. He had come to see Rhaegar as a complex man, perhaps trapped by prophecy, or by the swirl of his own convictions. Now, faced with the possibility of a living dragon that might be connected to Rhaegar's legacy, Jon wondered if ghosts truly lingered beyond the grave. Sleep came only in fitful bouts, and in the dark intervals of wakefulness, he thought he heard the faint caw of gulls, or the distant crash of waves that sounded almost like the rumble of a beast. The next day, the sky was gray, the wind unsettled. Jon donned his leathers and cloak, took Longclaw at his side. Brienne and a few loyal knights accompanied him along the coastline. Sparse villages dotted the shore, small huts with thatched roofs battered by storms, perched on cliff edges or nestled in rocky coves. The people here lived by fishing, crab hunting, the gleaning of pearls. They were suspicious of outsiders, even one rumored to be a Targaryen, but Brienne's presence eased some tensions, for she had done them kindness before. They spoke in hushed tones of bright glimmers overhead, terrifying roars in the dead of night, and something stirring the waves so fiercely that a few boats were overturned without explanation. None reported direct attacks or sightings of flames, just this eerie sense that something large, something alien, was at the fringes of their world. Jon spent hours traveling from hut to hut, hearing the same recollections, swift glimpses, a flash of silver, a rush of wind. One old fisherman claimed he'd seen it up close, that its eyes glowed like molten gold, that its length was slender, more serpentine than the bulk of Daenerys dragons, and that it moved with uncanny grace. Jon felt a stirring in his blood each time the fisherman uttered silver scales, reminded that Rhaegar's armor at the Trident was said to have shone like rubies and silver in the sun, though those were only half-remembered songs. Whether Rhaegar had been a skilled dragon rider in secret, no one truly knew. The Targaryens in that age had not possessed living dragons. Yet the fisherman insisted this creature was as alive as a fox in the henhouse, and that it carried with it the hush of something both ancient and new. Days passed in slow progression. Jon made a sort of base camp near a rocky inlet, quietly paying fisherfolk for use of their small huts and supplies. He and Brienne's knights took shifts watching the sea by night, scanning for any sign of silver wings crossing the moon. At times, he doubted himself, suspecting that the entire rumor was little more than illusions or an exaggerated story. But on the fourth night, as he stood by the jagged rocks, looking out over the black expanse of ocean, something moved across the sky. He nearly convinced himself it was only a low-sailing cloud, but the shape rolled, crossing the face of the moon just enough for the faintest glimmer to catch. Silver dot, a faint, ephemeral shimmer along a body that looked to be part dream, part reality. Jon's heart hammered in his chest, and Ghost let out a low, uneasy whine. A second later, the silhouette vanished into the clouds again, leaving only the memory of that shining shape behind. Jon stared at the emptiness for a long time, grappling with the realization that perhaps a dragon indeed roamed these skies. When he returned to the huts, he found Brienne dozing in a chair by the small fire. He roused her gently, face pale with excitement. She read the emotion in his eyes even before he spoke. "I saw it," he whispered, though he could not keep the trembling out of his voice. "It's real, Brienne. A dragon." She looked surprised, then concerned. "Gods be good. Perhaps we can track it. But how? The skies are vast, and we've only glimpsed it." "That is seeing." Jon raked a hand through his hair. "We'll need a better vantage point. This country is full of crags and cliffs. If it roosts anywhere, it might be on the higher peaks, or there could be sea caves along the coast where it hides. The more he spoke, the more he felt his blood quicken, as though something in him yearned to find this creature. Was it simply the Targaryen in him, or a deeper pull? They debated plans. Brienne suggested sending out separate scouting parties. Jon argued that if the dragon was reclusive, half their men might vanish in a swirl of flame. But no one had reported flaming attacks, which made him wonder if this dragon was content simply to remain hidden. In the end, they resolved to go carefully by boat along the cliff faces, searching for openings or fissures that might lead to caverns large enough for a dragon. It was a risky ploy, but with calm waters forecast for the next day, it might be their best chance. As morning broke, they set out on 2 sturdy fishing vessels, manned by locals who owed Brienne some favor or else were lured by the promise of gold. Jon's men kept crossbows and ropes at the ready, though Jon did not believe for a moment that such weapons would be enough if the dragon decided to attack. Brienne, however, insisted they keep some measure of defense. A thick mist clung to the sea's surface, and the boats rocked gently as they navigated the coastline, scanning the high cliffs for any sign of life. Hours passed with only the cries of gulls and the splash of water to punctuate the hush. The sun climbed, then descended in the west, painting the edges of the cliffs in ochre and gold. They found no trace of the dragon, only the swirl of sea foam below dark caverns that seemed far too small for a creature of that size. When night threatened to fall again, one of the local fishermen pointed toward a series of jagged rocks protruding near a cliff face that seemed smooth and unremarkable. "If I remember a story from my grandfather," he said, "there's a hidden inlet there, behind the rocks, that opens to a larger cave. We used to say sea monsters lived in it. Could be nothing, or could be your silver beast." Jon felt a spark of hope. He directed the boats closer, though the threat of being dashed upon the rocks was real. They made slow, careful progress, the fishermen navigating with uncanny skill, until they squeezed through a narrow gap into calmer waters within. A gloom hung over the inlet, the rock walls high and forbidding on either side, and ahead lay a yawning cave mouth. It sloped upward, seeming to recede into darkness. The stink of salt and wet stone permeated the air. Brienne eyed Jon with a look that said she'd follow him, though she was not entirely comfortable doing so. He nodded, beckoning her and a handful of men to disembark on a small, stony ledge. Ghost leapt onto the rocks, sniffing the air, ears pricked. Jon held Longclaw ready, though a part of him whispered that steel meant nothing if the dragon spat flame. Cautiously, they advanced into the mouth of the cave, torches sputtering against the moist air. Water dripped in slow echoes. The path twisted sharply around a bend, and then the space opened up into an enormous chamber. The torch's light was pitiful against the vastness. Jon could feel more than see the immensity of the cavern's ceiling. The rocky floor sloped upward, strewn with debris, driftwood, piles of stone, some ancient wreckage. A hush fell over them as they listened. Jon's heart hammered. If the dragon lurked here, it could ambush them at any moment. They advanced in small steps, each footfall echoing with ominous clarity. Then they came upon something that made Jon's breath hitch. Scattered bones, large bones. The ribcage of a whale perhaps, or some monstrous sea creature. The skeleton had been gnawed, the marks on the bones unmistakable. But no sign of flame or scorching. Brienne knelt, running a gloved hand over the grooves in the bone. She stood again, and her worried gaze found Jon's. "It's been feeding here," she murmured. He nodded, swallowing hard. At that moment, Ghost let out a low growl. The direwolf's hackles rose, and he stared into the deeper darkness on the far side of the chamber. Everyone froze, torches flickering, hearts racing. Jon saw movement, a shifting of something impossibly large. His mind fumbled to process it. There was a soft scraping sound, perhaps scales against rock, and then a pair of luminescent golden eyes appeared in the darkness. The torchlight caught a glimmer of silver scales, shining faintly like starlight. Fear seized Jon, a primal terror that told him to back away. Brienne lifted her sword in trembling readiness. The knights behind them struggled to raise crossbows. but their hands shook with the knowledge that their weapons were meager. Jon stood very still, long claws hilt pressing into his palm, the breath in his lungs turning shallow. Ghost's growl deepened, but the direwolf did not lunge. It was more a warning that they were not alone. At last the shape emerged a bit more into the torchlight, revealing a creature of sleek lines and shimmering scales, far less bulky than Drogon or Rhaegar had been. Its head was graceful, crowned by backward curving horns of a pale ivory hue. The wings, folded along its flanks, looked strong and tapering. Jon found it beautiful and horrifying in equal measure, like a living blade forged from moonlight. The dragon regarded them with an inscrutable gaze, the flick of its long tail betraying attention that might precede either flight or attack. No one moved. The air grew thick. Then the dragon's head tilted, and it let out a low rumble from its throat. Neither an outright challenge nor a friendly greeting. Jon felt as though he stood on the edge of a cliff, one misstep from doom. His mind rushed. How had Daenerys approached her dragons when they were uncertain? She had always preached calm, fearlessness, a willingness to show no threat yet also no surrender. Slowly, excruciatingly slowly, Jon slid Longclaw back into its scabbard, showing open palms. "Easy," he breathed, though whether to his men or the dragon he was not entirely sure. Ghost whined but stayed at his side. Jon took a tentative step forward, focusing on the creature's eyes. They glowed like new forged steel in the torchlight. At that moment, he felt a wild swirl in his blood, a pulse that quickened with something that might have been recognition, like the echo of old Targaryen magic. Brienne hissed, "Jon, get back." But he shook his head slowly, continuing that single step forward. The dragon's gaze locked onto him, pupils narrowing to slits. Jon could hear the creature's breath, smell the reptilian musk and brine. It was large enough to tear him apart with a single bite, or roast him alive if it so chose. But it did neither. Instead, it let out a puff of air through its nostrils, stirring Jon's hair with the faint, hot wind. In the hush, Jon felt words trembling on his lips, though no coherent thought followed. He simply stared into those golden eyes. The silence stretched. The knights behind him quivered, ready to unleash crossbow bolts that would likely do more to anger the dragon than slay it. Jon lifted a hand slowly, pausing when the dragon's throat rumbled again. He waited, heart pounding, until that rumble subsided, and then he moved his hand a fraction more. His fingertips brushed the edge of the dragon's snout, contacting scales that were surprisingly warm to the touch, smooth as polished stone. A trembling started in his arm, but he did not withdraw. The dragon snorted softly. Jon felt its hot breath wash over his hand, smelled the briny tang mingled with a charred scent that lingered faintly, though he saw no fresh scorch marks. He wondered, for a fleeting instant, if those silver scales were a reflection of Rhaegar's regal attire from some half-remembered dream. But that was madness. This beast was very real, alive, present. And in that moment, with his hand pressed to the dragon's jaw, Jon felt as though something shifted inside him, a resonance that matched the old stories of Targaryen riders bonding with their dragon. Could it be so simple? Perhaps not. There was caution and wariness in the creature's eyes, but also an unexpected acceptance that Jon could scarcely understand. He took another step forward, and the dragon allowed it. Now standing close enough that he could see the faint patterns on its scales, he murmured, "You are no enemy to me. I wish you no harm." He didn't know why he was talking to it, but the words spilled out anyway. The dragon made no move to recoil, though its tail lashed once, stirring dust. Behind Jon, Brienne and the knights stared in mute astonishment. Then, with a slow elegance, the dragon turned its head slightly, as though presenting its flank. Jon's heart hammered anew. Was it an invitation or a test? He felt a tug in his blood to move, to place a hand against its neck. The old songs said the Targaryens had a connection to dragons that defied reason. But Daenerys had spent years nurturing and raising her brood. Jon had done no such thing. And yet here was a living, breathing beast that had apparently existed in secret, possibly for years, maybe since long before Daenerys' eggs hatched across the sea. He couldn't begin to unravel how or why. But it stood before him, shimmering like silver flame in the flickering torchlight, as if waiting for something. When he pressed his palm against the dragon's flank, the rumble in its chest grew deeper, vibrating through Jean's bones. He felt more terror now than when fighting the others on the battlements. But he refused to let that fear break the fragile thread of connection forming between them. Slowly, carefully, he stroked its scales, letting the warmth seep into him. The dragon's head dipped slightly, almost a bow, as if it recognized him in some wordless fashion. Joan's throat felt tight. He wished, in that moment, he had the knowledge or presence of mind to speak High Valyrian, as Daenerys had, to see if the creature recognized certain commands or phrases. But all he could do was hold steady and let this tenuous bond unfold. Behind him, one of the knights was foolish enough to shift his stance, and the scrape of steel on stone rang out, echoing. The dragon's head whipped around, eyes narrowing, a hiss escaping its throat. Jon tensed, stepping in front of the knight by reflex, lifting a calming hand. "Easy," he whispered. "No one here wants to hurt you." The dragon's tail flicked in agitation, but after a moment, it turned its gaze back to Jon, as if deciding to place trust in him if no one else. Jon cast a warning glance at his knights, silently urging them to stay still, to avoid any sudden moves. In time, the tension eased, and Jon found himself studying the creature's form more closely. It was large, yes, but younger than Drogon had been when he saw it last. There was a lithe quality to it, as though it was built for speed rather than raw power. Its scales were the color of polished silver, with subtle undertones of pale blue in certain lights, giving it an otherworldly glimmer. The horns sweeping back from its head were slender. Its eyes gleamed with an intelligence that unsettled Jon more than any mindless aggression might have. 100 questions burned on his tongue. Where had it come from? Why had it hidden here, alone? Then he thought of Rhaegar. If, by some unthinkable twist of fate, there had been an egg or a hidden hatchling that Rhaegar had secretly guarded, could it have survived all these years, hidden away in some labyrinthine corner of the world? Could the chaos of the wars, the shifting of magic that accompanied Daenerys Dragon's birth, have awakened it? Jon could only guess, but the weight of it pressed upon him like 1,000 stones. At length, the dragon let out a low sighing sound, almost a huff, and sank down onto its haunches, partially coiling its tail around its forelimbs. Jon took that as an invitation to linger. He found himself daring to run his hand along its neck, marveling at the texture of each overlapping scale. He could feel its heartbeat, thudding with slow, steady power. Ghost ventured closer, nose twitching. The direwolf's instincts torn between wariness and curiosity. The dragon turned to look at Ghost, but did not hiss. Instead, it exhaled a short, warm breath that ruffled the direwolf's thick fur. Ghost blinked his red eyes, tail low, but stepped back, apparently unsure how to interact with this enormous newcomer. Brienne's voice was hushed when she finally spoke. "It appears to accept you, Jon. How does that feel?" He turned slightly, eyes still on the dragon. "I'm not certain yet. It's as if it knows me somehow, or senses something in me. My blood, maybe." He exhaled shakily. "I never asked for this." Brienne's expression softened. "No, I don't imagine you did." The knights behind her were still wide-eyed, crossbows half lowered, as if they were witnessing an unthinkable miracle. One of them mumbled, "Seven save us. He's truly a Targaryen." That comment made Jon's shoulders tense. He could sense how easily illusions of kingship might be born from this. He wanted no crown, no renewed war for the throne. He only wished to understand his past and keep the realm at peace. Now, with a dragon poised at his side, that might become an even greater challenge. But those were concerns for tomorrow. For now, he had to ensure no harm came to the creature, and that none of his men got themselves incinerated by accident. They lingered in that chamber for a while, letting the dragon grow accustomed to their presence. Jon dared not move too quickly or push it. The moment he or anyone showed aggression, this fragile trust could shatter. Slowly, the beast allowed him closer, let him inspect the rest of the cavern. There were old, half-rotted barrels near the far wall, remnants of some previous occupant of the cave, or cargo washed in by the tide. John found a worn tapestry, its design half-faded. He could not make out the sigil, but the dragon showed no interest in such trifles. At last, John decided it was time to withdraw, as darkness had well and truly settled, and the torches were burning low. Approaching the dragon's head again, he attempted to mimic something Daenerys once did, lifting his open hands as if to communicate that he intended to leave. The dragon made a low rumble, somewhere between reluctance and acceptance. John stepped back, bowing his head in thanks as if to a living god. Then he retreated, beckoning Brienne and the knights to do the same. They did so slowly, weapons stowed, hearts still racing. The dragon watched them go, turning its head only once to follow their exit with those glowing eyes. Emerging into the night air felt like stepping from one dream into another. The boatmen were waiting nervously, uncertain of what had transpired within the cavern. John locked eyes with them, pressing a finger to his lips to indicate silence. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, as all of them boarded the fishing boats once more, the questions came in hushed bursts. Is it truly a dragon? Did you touch it? Is it going to devour us all? John responded in clipped, measured words, trying to preserve calm. Yes, it was real. Yes, he touched it. No. It did not seem intent on devouring them, but no one was to provoke it. Word must not spread yet. The fewer who knew, the safer the dragon would remain. From men who feared it, and from men who might try to exploit it. They spent the night in tense reflection, huddled around a small fire back at the huts. Brienne and John conferred quietly, trying to decide their next move. Some of the knights argued that they should try to contact Daenerys, if she could be reached, that she might know how best to handle another living dragon. But Daenerys was thousands of leagues away, dealing with the remnants of war in Slaver's Bay. John was loath to wait for her, uncertain if she would even approve of him claiming any bond with the creature. Another suggested they send ravens to the citadel, gather maesters to study the phenomenon. But John feared that would only stir up a swirl of political interest and potential threats. For now, he decided, the best course is secrecy. We must learn the dragon's nature, its needs, how it survived. If we bring half the realm down on its head, it could result in violence and destruction, for the dragon and for anyone in its path. Now to Manaxmai. Brienne, stoic and wise, nodded. We should earn its trust first, if trust can be earned at all. So they formed a plan. Each day, small groups would row to the secret inlet, bring fresh meat, fish and goat if they could manage. They would leave it for the dragon, gradually proving that they meant no harm. John would attempt to approach it, forging a sense of consistency, so the dragon might recognize him as a non-threat. That was the theory, at least. In practice, it could go very differently. But in his heart, John felt a guiding light, as if some part of him was at last claiming the inheritance he had never wanted, but was nonetheless bound to. He thought of Rhaegar, who died never knowing if his lineage would continue. If this was his father's dragon, somehow, then perhaps fate had twisted upon itself once more. Days became a blur of cautious visits to the cave. At times, the dragon was not present, leaving only the scattered bones of its meals behind. Other times, it was curled in the shadows, dozing with eyes half-lidded. Ghost accompanied John, always on guard, but never acting aggressively. Brienne, unwavering in her sense of responsibility, hovered near but respected Joan's lead. The knights grew accustomed to glimpsing that sleek silver shape coiled in the darkness, though it never allowed them as close as it allowed John. Gradually, the tension of each meeting eased. The dragon grew used to the smell of their torches and the sound of their footfalls. John, in turn, learned the subtle shifts of its body language, the flick of the tail that meant annoyance, the half-lowering of the eyelids that meant contentment, the rearing of its neck that signaled alertness. On the 7th day of these visits, the dragon did something unprecedented. After allowing John to set down a bundle of salted fish, it rose to its full height, towering over him, wings partially spread. Brienne and the knights stiffened, ready for the worst. But instead of attacking, it opened its jaws and gave a low-throated cry. a resonant sound that made the cavern walls tremble. It moved toward Jon, turning its flank so that a portion of its neck and shoulders were within reach. Jon hesitated, hardly daring to breathe. The dragon paused as if waiting. Then it let out another low rumble, insistent. An old memory stirred in Jon's mind from when he saw Daenerys approach Drogon in a similar manner, climbing upon its back to ride. But never had Jon imagined he might do the same. This was madness, he thought. He could break his neck or be flung into a rock wall. Or worse, the dragon might decide he was no friend after all. Yet the quiet, pulsing sense within him, something primal and Targaryen, urged him forward. He signaled to the others to remain still. Carefully, heart-pounding, he laid a hand on the dragon's side, hoisting himself up with slow deliberation, trying to find a place among the ridges of its scales to gain purchase. The creature remained still, occasionally letting out a soft exhalation that rippled through its body, as if it found the sensation strange but not intolerable. When Jon finally settled atop the dragon's shoulders, the vantage point made his stomach flip. The cavern floor lay far below. He could see the ripple of powerful muscles beneath the scales. With a sudden lurch, the dragon shifted its weight, spread its wings. Jon braced himself, hands clinging to the bony ridges at the base of its neck. He heard Brienne cry out in alarm. He could see the knights gawking. But the dragon did not spring into flight. Instead, it took a few steps, as if testing how it felt to have this man on its back. Its tail swished, stirring the shadows. Jon clung tighter, breath catching in his throat. For a moment, he remembered all the times he had soared on the back of Rhaegar in battle alongside Daenerys in the war. But that had been with her guidance and acceptance, and the bond they shared with those dragons was already proven. This was different. Him, alone, forging a new link with a creature that had no prior alliance with any living Targaryen. After a few more cautious steps, the dragon knelt again, allowing Jon to dismount. He did so with shaking legs, stumbling onto the cavern floor. Brienne rushed to his side, eyes wide, hands steadying him. She did not speak, but the question in her eyes was clear. "Are you all right?" He nodded numbly, trying to process what had just happened. The knights behind her looked as though they'd seen the stranger himself descend. But within Jon, a spark of awe unfurled. Unstoppable. He placed a trembling palm on the dragon's jaw once more, and the creature let out a deep, echoing sound that might have been acceptance, or perhaps curiosity. Their eyes met, and in the reflections of its golden gaze, Jon thought he saw his own reflection, a swirl of black hair and uncertain destiny, mirrored back at him. When they finally retreated from the cave, the realization weighed on Jon like a crow perched on his shoulder. The dragon was no mere legend. It was real, and it had chosen to tolerate him, and possibly more than tolerate him. Perhaps in time, if he dared, it might let him ride upon the wind, bridging the gap between man and myth. And with that thought came the dreaded knowledge that the world would never leave such a marvel to quiet anonymity. If it became widely known that Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, some still insisted, had claimed another living dragon, it would spark awe and fear across the realm. Allies would beg for his favor, enemies would conspire to bring him down, and the realm that was still healing might be torn again. Yet in the hush of that evening, returning to their makeshift camp by the sea, he could not deny the strange sense of rightness that pulsed in his chest. A dragon had survived. Not Daenerys. Not one of the old skulls from the throne room. Something hidden, perhaps a relic of Rhaegar's unwavering belief in prophecy. And it had accepted Jon, insofar as any dragon can accept a mortal man. He stared out at the restless waves long after the others had found sleep, their exhaustion too great to match his roiling thoughts. Ghost lay beside him, silent as the moonlight. Jon felt the night breeze brush his hair, tasted the brine on his lips, and wondered if Rhaegar was looking down on him from beyond. If Rhaegar's spirit might find some peace in knowing that his legacy lived not just in a son he never knew, but in a dragon that soared on silver wings. Jon closed his eyes, letting that deep, ancient magic in his blood sing for a moment, unguarded and raw. Here in the dark, he allowed himself a single hope, that somehow, with time and care, He could tend this fragile bond and use it to protect, rather than destroy. That he might stand by this dragon and not turn the realm into a battlefield once more. That he might, at long last, find a place where both Stark and Targaryen could live as one in him, forging a new path unbound by the bloody mistakes of the past. He opened his eyes again, and in the distance, beyond the dark silhouette of the coastal cliffs, a faint shimmer of silver light flickered across the sky. Perhaps the dragon was out there, patrolling the night, feeling the pull of the moon and the tide. Jon watched that light, enthralled and haunted. Something new had begun, and he stood at its threshold. There in the hush of the night, with only the gulls and the murmuring waves as witness, he murmured a single vow under his breath. "I will not fail this time. Whatever you are, wherever you came from, I will protect you." His words vanished into the wind, but the vow remained, lingering in the silent spaces between each roll of the sea. He settled back, exhaustion creeping over him, finally letting his eyes drift shut. Ghost's warmth pressed against his leg, a silent sentinel. Dreams claimed Jon, and in them, he saw faint images. A silver dragon coiling through the clouds, and a figure he recognized as Rhaegar Targaryen, standing with a faint smile, a silver harp in hand. The father he had never known spoke no words, but his eyes brimmed with unspoken acceptance. Somewhere beyond, Jon sensed Lyanna, her laughter carried like wind through the reeds. It was a tapestry of love, loss, and hope. When he woke with the pale dawn filtering through ragged clouds, tears stained his cheeks, though he could not recall the fullness of the dream. Yet the sense of it lingered like a half-remembered melody, guiding his heart. He rose, cold from the night air, but with renewed purpose. Beyond those cliffs lay a secret that might reshape his destiny. He could only move forward and meet it head-on, as he had met every trial in his life, with courage in his heart and the memory of those he loved at his back. And so he would. The morning light in Tarth carried a soft haze, as though reluctant to fully banish the shadows of night. Jon stood by the shore with the tang of salt in his nostrils, and the gray-blue waves lapping before him. He'd been awake since the earliest streak of dawn, dreaming of silver scales and the sound of leathery wings hidden among rock walls. Each day since his first contact with the dragon, the bond between them deepened in small but tangible steps. He couldn't yet call it companionship. Trust was fragile with a beast of that power. But a silent understanding had begun to form. He felt the presence of the rest of his small band behind him. Brienne was awake, her pale eyes watchful, as she checked the boats they used to slip through the hidden inlet. The knights busied themselves gathering nets, baskets of fish, and salted goat strips they'd bartered from nearby villages. Ghosts prowled near Jon's side, lapping occasionally at the foam as the ocean spilled onto the gritty sand. The direwolf's ears twitched with every distant cry of gulls, his red eyes cutting from side to side. Jon allowed his gaze to rest on the distant cliffs. High above, gulls circled, specks of white against the sharp lines of stone. He didn't see any hint of silver wings at that moment, but he knew the dragon was there. He felt it in his marrow. That subtle stirring in his blood, which had awakened to a Targaryen heritage he hadn't wanted. Now he did not know what he felt. Awe, exhilaration, or a simmering dread over what it might mean for the realm. He had not come south to claim dominion over anyone. Yet a dragon answered to him, or began to, at least, and that changed everything. Brienne approached, plate and mail glinting in the early light. She offered him a brief nod, a sign that the boats were ready. He noticed how the wind teased her short, cropped hair. She had grown more comfortable with these daily excursions, though wariness still shadowed her features. There was a faint bruise on her chin from where she'd nearly lost her footing on slick rocks the previous day. But her posture was unbowed by any fear. They boarded the 2 fishing skiffs, each carrying provisions wrapped carefully in waxed cloth. The boatmen were seasoned folk who'd plied these waters for decades. They knew how to angle their crafts through the precarious gap in the reef, leading to the hidden inlet. Jon's party divided between the 2 skiffs, nights quiet, weapons sheathed. After so many visits without provocation from the dragon, they no longer kept crossbows in hand. Still, A sense of tension clung to the air, as though everyone recognized that any day, at any moment, everything could change. The inlet was calm, under a pale sun. They glided past weathered rock formations and a froth of seaweed that drifted like emerald ghosts beneath the surface. Seabirds screeched overhead, but there was no roar from within the dark recesses of the cave. Even Ghost, normally quick to bristle, lay quietly near Jon's feet, muzzle resting on his paws. Jon tried to keep his breathing steady, determined not to let excitement get the better of him. Once they docked against the narrow shelf of stone, Jon led the way into the cave. It was as immense as ever, its gloom broken only by the torches they carried, and that faint phosphorescent glow from certain patches of algae on the walls. The drip-drip of water was a constant backdrop. Bones from past meals remained scattered. Fish spines, fragments of what might be a seal or a large seabird's skeleton. But as Jon and Brienne ventured deeper, they saw something else. Scraps of driftwood piled in a corner, arranged in a vaguely nest-like shape. The dragon must have carried them in from the sea. It was building a comfort zone, or perhaps just passing the time, but that simple arrangement struck Jon in a place deeper than logic. The creature was beginning to settle here, not merely hide. A tremor of motion rippled in the darkness beyond the torchlight. Golden eyes appeared, reflecting the flames with uncanny brightness. Jon inhaled, motioned for the knights to halt. Step by step, he approached, rummaging in the cloth bundle he carried. Retrieving the salted goat, he laid it out on a broad, flat rock that served as their makeshift offering space. The dragon stretched its neck forward, sniffing the air. A low, resonant rumble vibrated through the cavern. Jon's heart beat in tandem with that sound. The silver scales shimmered as the creature emerged more fully. It lowered its muzzle to sniff at the goat strips. Then, with a flick of its tongue, it claimed the meat, devouring it in 2 quick snaps of powerful jaws. The knights murmured among themselves. Jon stood still, arms lowered at his sides, watching the dragon chew and swallow. Each movement of that serpentine throat held a strange grace. Its horns, pale and sleek, gleamed in the torchlight. When it finished, it turned its gaze to Jon. He stepped closer, hand extended, letting the beast catch his scent. The dragon allowed him to brush his fingers along its jaw. Brienne let out a slow breath, stepping forward alongside him. The dragon's eyes flicked to her, pupils narrowing. She offered no threat, her sword sheathed. She merely raised a torch higher, so that the light fell upon them both, revealing details of the dragon's flank and ridged spine that had been lost in shadow. Jon felt the subtle tension in the air. The dragon had begun to accept him, but it had not shown the same patience for others. With a soft hiss, it exhaled a puff of warm breath that stirred Brienne's hair. She stood her ground, head bowed slightly. The dragon eventually turned its attention back to Jon, as if to say she could stay so long as she brought no conflict. Jon inhaled, bracing himself for the next step. Each day he ventured to see if the dragon would tolerate him climbing onto its back. He had done so a handful of times now, always within the safety of the cave's confines, never pushing the creature to take flight. Each time felt like a test of delicate trust. Now, as he reached for the ridges along the dragon's flank, it made a low chuffing noise, a small rumble in its throat, neither welcoming nor hostile. Steeling himself, Jon found handholds among the curved spines that jutted around the dragon's shoulders. He hoisted himself up, mindful of where his boots found purchase on the thick scales. The creature's powerful muscles shifted beneath him, but it did not lash its tail or fling him off. He felt it breathe. He felt his own pulse leap. From this vantage, the cavern appeared almost unearthly. Torchlight danced on the walls, the soft murmur of the nights behind them blending with the ocean's distant echo from the inlet. Jon dared not look down too quickly. One misstep, and he might tumble onto the rocks. Even the memory of riding Rhaegar in the War for the Dawn couldn't prepare him for this raw and untested bond. The silver dragon was an enigma. It pressed no memories into his mind the way he'd almost sensed Rhaegar's presence. Yet in the hush of this chamber, he thought he felt a faint hum in his blood, as though an ancient chord resonated between them. Carefully he coaxed the dragon to take a few steps. The creature's wings rustled, their membranes half unfurling in the torchlight. Jon clung to the ridges, focusing on staying balanced. It felt both exhilarating and precarious, as though he danced on a knife's edge that could plunge into darkness at any moment. Still, the dragon did not fling him off. It paced slowly, massive talons scraping the stone. Then it stopped, exhaling a heavy breath that blew dust from the ground. Jon dismounted, landing heavily beside Brienne. She looked at him as if trying to decide whether to scold him for recklessness. She settled for a short nod. Together, they stepped back while the knights whispered exclamations of surprise. The dragon sat upon its haunches, tail curling around its feet, watching them with a regal tilt of its head. Jon found himself murmuring, "You're more patient than I deserve," in a low voice. He wasn't sure if he spoke to the dragon or to the gods. Perhaps both. He and Brienne lingered a while, ensuring the creature finished the meal and showed no sign of distress or injury. Once they departed, they rowed back across the inlet, weaving through that hidden gap in the rocks. The morning had advanced into midday, and the sun now blazed overhead, scattering diamond-like reflections upon the sea. Back on the beach, the fisherfolk who had gathered to see if the Targaryen rumors were true waited. But Jon and Brienne's stoic expressions revealed nothing. Most of the small folk parted respectfully, offering no more than a few cautious glances. Gossip would spread, inevitably. But Jon hoped it would be vague enough to keep trouble at bay for a little while. Brienne helped him unload the leftover supplies. Ghost bounded onto the sand, shaking droplets of salt water from his fur. The knights guided the boats to their moorings, tying them off to stout pilings hammered into the rocky shore. A hush lay over them all, the memory of the dragon's presence heavy as a boulder. Jon wondered if they felt the same awe and apprehension that churned in his own stomach. Probably so. He could see it in their eyes, hear it in the hush of their voices. That evening, as they gathered by a sheltered fire in a ring of stones, Jon found his thoughts drifting back to the images of Rhaegar Targaryen he'd conjured in his dreams. He remembered the dream harp, the gentle, haunting chords that seemed to echo in his mind even now. The father he never knew had been the impetus for so many tragedies. And yet, Rhaegar might have had good intentions twisted by fate and prophecy. Could it be that the silver dragon was another ripple in that same fate? A piece of Rhaegar's hopes that had outlived him? Jon's mind spun with the possibilities. Brienne spoke quietly, as the flames danced across her features. "Are you sleeping at all? You seem as though you carry a burden heavier than the north." Jon managed a slight smile. "I sleep, but the dreams come. I see glimpses of my father, my mother, Tarth. I see the dragon. Some nights I see all three together, though it makes no sense." He stirred the embers with a stick, sending sparks aloft. "It feels like I'm on the cusp of something too big for me to hold." Brienne's lips pressed into a firm line. "I can't pretend to know what it's like, discovering your parentage so late, or forging a bond with a dragon no one else has ever known. But I do know that you have more sense and heart than most men who claim power. If the gods intended you to do something with this creature, I would trust you to do it honorably." Jon let the reassurance settle over him. Her words offered comfort, though he remained uneasy. He thought of the political ramifications, houses that might rally to a new Targaryen banner, or those who might plot to kill him out of fear. The realm was recovering. Would a new dragon incite only further chaos? But there was a simpler, starker fact. The dragon itself needed care, and if it was indeed alone, Jon felt compelled to protect it. Yes, Targaryens had used dragons to conquer, but perhaps there was another way. Perhaps he could shield it from human greed. That night, he lay awake in a modest bed, the same cramped chamber as before, listening to the sea-lashed winds and ghosts' gentle breathing. He turned his thoughts toward the next day. He resolved that tomorrow he would try to coax the dragon from the cave entirely, see if it would let him ride upon the open skies. The idea made his stomach twist with a mixture of excitement and dread. Memories of Rhaegar soared in his mind. The exhilaration of flight, the terror of realizing he had no true control. Yet if trust was to be built, they would need to face the air together eventually. He rose before dawn, strapping on leathers that clung to his torso. then tugging on a sturdy pair of gloves. He remembered how scorching a dragon's scales could be in the sun, though the silver beast felt more warm than blistering to the touch so far. Still, caution was wisdom. Brienne met him near the boats, a cloak thrown over her shoulders. Her eyes carried the weight of unspoken worry. Neither knight nor fisherman spoke as they pushed off into the early morning gloom. The skies were painted with pink and gold, dawn blossoming over Tarth's rugged beauty. Once they reached the cave, they found the dragon near the entrance, dozing on a ledge of stone. It roused at the sound of their footfalls, lifting its head. Jon noticed it had carried new bits of driftwood into a rough semicircle. Whether it was nesting or simply entertaining itself, he could not be sure. He approached with caution, placing fresh fish on the rock. The dragon ate, though it seemed more attentive to him than to its meal. He wondered if it sensed his heightened resolve. Brienne stood aside with the knights, giving him space. Jon squared his shoulders, inhaled deeply, and stepped closer to the dragon's flank. Once more, he took hold of the ridges and hoisted himself onto its back. The creature shifted, letting out a soft grunt, but did not throw him off. Jon's pulse thundered. He leaned forward, carefully placing his hands near the base of the dragon's neck, where the scales formed a natural ridge that might allow him to grip securely. He murmured a few nonsensical words of reassurance, letting the dragon hear his steady voice. With a slow, deliberate motion, he pressed his heels lightly against the dragon's sides, imitating the gesture he had once seen Daenerys make. The silver beast flicked its tail, turned its head, and considered him with one luminous eye. Jon felt certain it was judging whether to comply. Then, as if deciding, it lowered itself, coiled its hind legs, and leaped. The motion was so sudden that Jon gasped aloud. He barely had time to cling to the ridges before the dragon landed on a higher ledge, sending loose stones skittering down. The knights below cried out, all of them stumbling backward as dust rained. Jon's entire body tensed with anticipation. The dragon's wings unfurled, stretching to their full span. The sight stole Jon's breath. A powerful downward sweep of those wings caused a rush of air that extinguished half the torches below. Another leap, higher this time, so abrupt that Jon's stomach lurched. And then, with a mighty beat, the dragon propelled itself upward into the open sky beyond the cave mouth, bursting out over the coastal cliffs. The sudden brilliance of day dazzled Jon. Wind tore at his hair, buffeting his cheeks as the dragon's wings pounded. For a moment, panic seized him. He felt precarious, lacking a proper saddle, clinging only with hands and knees to the creature's scales. But the exhilaration of flight took hold, a wild surge that banished all else. The dragon soared in a broad arc above the rocky shoreline, its roar echoing across the waves. Jon glanced down, heart hammering, seeing the boats far below, the cluster of knights on the beach pointing upward in awe and terror. Brienne's figure was small, her hand shielding her eyes as she looked up at him. The dragon banked. Jon bit back a shout of alarm, holding fast to the ridges. He had flown before, but that was in war, in desperation, alongside Daenerys who knew how to guide her beasts. Here, he had no teacher, only instinct. The dragon, for its part, didn't attempt to throw him. It seemed more curious than anything, testing what this new weight on its back meant. Its wings sliced through the salt-tinged air, carrying them higher along the coastline. The cliffs fell away beneath them, revealing rocky promontories and swirling tides. Gulls scattered in alarm, their cries swallowed by the wind. In the few precious moments of level flight, Jon dared to lift his gaze from the dragon's scales and take in the sweeping view. The sea spread in every direction, glinting like hammered silver under the morning sun. The swirling patterns of current and reef below resembled twisting ribbons. This vantage brought back a vivid memory. The first time he'd soared upon Rhaegar's back near Winterfell. He recalled how Daenerys had laughed with unbridled joy, telling him to hold on tight. He felt a pang in his chest for that simpler, if dangerous, time. Now, he was alone in the skies with a different dragon, forging a new path. The dragon swung inland, passing over pockets of forest that clung to the craggy terrain. Below, startled deer bounded into the underbrush. Jon felt the shift of muscle beneath him, each wing beat reverberating through his bones. He kept his grip firm, leaning forward to reduce wind resistance. The dragon let out a bellowing call that echoed among the hills. Jon had a wild thought that perhaps it was calling out for others of its kind, but the only answer was the moan of the wind and distant gull cries. At last, the silver beast began a slow, circling descent, heading back toward the rocky beach. Jon saw the flicker of the campfire they used as a marker. The knights, Brienne among them, scattered to give the dragon space to land. It touched down in an explosion of sand and pebbles, wings fanning out to steady itself. Jon dismounted, legs trembling so badly he nearly collapsed. Still, he managed to keep his footing, stepping aside just in time for the dragon to fold its wings neatly along its spine. Brienne stared at him, her expression etched with astonishment. The knights had likewise fallen silent. Jon's chest heaved as he tried to catch his breath, adrenaline racing through his veins like wildfire. His dark hair stuck to his forehead. For a moment, the only sound was the rush of the waves and the dragon's deep, rhythmic breathing. One of the knights finally spoke, voice thick with awe. 7 hells he's ridden it, just like a true Targaryen. The man glanced around as if expecting the heavens to part. Jon almost felt an urge to protest that he was still Jon Snow, that all he wanted was to keep the realm safe. But the reality was undeniable. He had taken flight, a mortal man upon a dragon's back. Daenerys was not there to overshadow him this time. He had done it alone. The significance of that weighed on him like a crown of lead. Brienne approached carefully, her gaze never leaving the dragon's watchful eyes. The creature allowed her to come near, though it lifted its head, huffing a warm breath. She spoke softly, her words for Jon's ears as much as the dragon's. "I thought you'd be dashed to bits on the cliffs, but you returned in one piece." Jon nodded, the taste of salt lingering on his lips. "It flies like a blade cutting through the air. I've never felt anything quite like it." He paused, looking at the dragon's gleaming scales. "It didn't fight me. It let me ride." He turned to Brienne, voice trembling with an undercurrent of emotion. "It trusts me, at least enough to do that. I can't squander that gift." "Nah." She studied him, eyes reflecting her respect. "Then we must guard that trust with everything we have." As the dragon settled on the beach, knights and boatmen kept a wide circle. Jon could see how it scanned each face with an almost uncanny intelligence. He worried it might grow restless with so many watchers, but the presence of the open sky seemed to calm the beast. It half closed its eyes, soaking in the morning sun. Jon thought he saw a faint shimmer of color ripple across its scales, a shifting from silver to pale lilac to near white as the light struck different angles. It was mesmerizing. A gentle breeze brushed across them. Jon heard a few fishermen whispering behind him, something about the dragon prince. He tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the rhythmic expansion of the dragon's chest. It was alive, a part of the world, neither wholly divine nor mundane. Yet men would weave legends around it anyway. He wondered how long until rumor spread beyond Tarth, until lords and ladies clamored at their gates with questions and demands. He wondered if some might sail forth to see the silver dragon for themselves, or to slay it out of fear. The thought made him press a hand against the creature's flank in silent reassurance. In time, the dragon rose, shook out its wings, and let out a short bark that might have been impatience or mere restlessness. Jon stepped aside, giving it space. With a few powerful strides it took to the air once more, climbing in a swift ascent over the shoreline. The knights gasped and shielded their eyes from the flying sand. Within heartbeats, the dragon became a silver silhouette in the morning sky, vanishing beyond a jutting cliff. Jon released a breath he'd been holding. Ghost, unsettled by the sudden movement, paced and sniffed at the footprints left in the sand. Brienne approached again, her brow creased with thought. "You said you can't squander this trust. May I ask what you plan to do next?" Jon lifted his gaze to the horizon where the dragon had disappeared. "I mean to keep visiting it, strengthening that bond. If it's willing, we may soon fly farther, see more of the land. God's willing, no one will disturb us. But we both know that can't last forever. Word travels fast, and a dragon in Westeros is too great a thing to remain a secret for long." "Now, sand." She nodded gravely. "Shall I prepare for those who might seek you out?" Jon grimaced. "Yes. And prepare for those who might seek to kill the dragon out of fear. But let's not provoke them. We'll stay quiet. I want to give the realm time to heal, not reignite old feuds. Yet we must be ready." Then Nocturnal. They retired to the campsite, where the knights nursed their awe with flasks of watered wine. The boatmen exchanged wide-eyed glances, uncertain whether to speak. Jon and Brienne conferred with them, offering calm words and promises of fair payment, so long as they kept the dragon's presence discreet. Most of the fisherfolk seemed content to do as he asked, for they had no desire to see their home turned into a battlefield. Still, a few cast sidelong looks at Jon, as though he had transformed overnight from a traveling lord into something else entirely. That evening, Jon wandered alone along the edge of the surf, letting the cool water lap at his boots. The sky was streaked with oranges and pinks, the sun sliding behind the horizon in a blaze of color. Ghost bounded ahead, chasing a stray crab in the shallows. Each breath Jon took felt charged with a mixture of longing and foreboding. He yearned to see the dragon again, to feel that rush of flight, but duty tugged at him. He had to think carefully about how to protect it from the realm, and the realm from it. Dragons were no small matter. They were living weapons if turned to war. Could he truly shield Westeros from the havoc another dragon might unleash, especially if cunning lords tried to harness its power? He let the wind and waves carry his thoughts for a time before turning back to the huts. A small circle had gathered around a fire. Brienne, a couple of knights, and a weathered fisherman who spun a tale about seeing dragons during the rebellion, though Jon suspected half the story was invention. Jon quietly sat, listening. The fisherman claimed to have once glimpsed Rhaegar Targaryen from afar, that he had seen the man's silver armor glint in the sunlight near the Ruby Fort. Whether true or not, the image struck Jon. He imagined Rhaegar on that day, confident in some grand design that never came to pass. He thought of the rubies that spilled into the water when Robert's hammer struck him down, a story that had lodged into the realm's collective memory like a shard of glass. Were they connected somehow? Was there a cosmic thread leading from those lost rubies to this silver dragon? He must have been staring into the fire too intently, for Brienne gently touched his arm, reminding him that there was supper to be had. The knights had cooked fish spiced with local herbs. Jon forced himself to eat, though his mind remained half absent. The food was fresh, the flavors sharp, but he hardly tasted it. He could think only of silver wings and a future as nebulous as smoke. When the fisherman finished his tale, the group dispersed. Some turned in for the night, others went to tend the boats or check the nets. Jon lingered by the dying embers, letting the warmth soak into him. Brienne stayed a moment longer, sitting on a driftwood log across from him. Her brow furrowed. She seemed to weigh her words. At last she said, "You must write to those you trust, yes? Lord Davos, perhaps, or Samwell Tarly. They should know about this." Jon hesitated. He thought of Davos, the Onion Knight, who had stood beside Stannis and then followed Jon out of respect. He could be a valuable ally, honest, sensible, well-liked. And Sam, his dearest friend from the Night's Watch, was now a maester of no small knowledge. Perhaps Sam could help him research any ties the dragon might have to Rhaegar's hidden studies. But the idea of sending ravens filled him with caution. Letters could be intercepted. "I do trust them," he said at length. "But I'm not sure I trust the wings that carry the letters. Too many eyes might see, maybe in time. For now, we hold it close." Brienne nodded, accepting his reasoning. "Then what of Daenerys? She is your..." She paused, uncertain which word to use. "Aunt? Lover? Ally?" The relationships had been complicated, especially after they discovered the truth of Jon's parentage. "She's queen in Meereen, or so the rumors say. Are you going to send word to her?" Jon looked to the dark sea. Question stung. He had parted ways with Daenerys in uneasy peace after the war, each of them needing to rebuild what was broken. They had parted with no formal farewell, just an understanding that their bond, once so urgent, might never be the same. "I'm not sure. She has Drogon, if he's still with her. and a realm of her own to tend. This might only complicate matters for her and for me. He kept his voice low, not wanting the knights within earshot to overhear. Brienne rested her elbows on her knees. "You're worried she'd claim the dragon for herself?" Jon shook his head slightly. "Not exactly, but it would bring up old questions of succession and alliances. The realm doesn't need more strife. Let me first see if I can ensure the dragon is at peace here." Brienne's gaze lingered on him, searching for a sign of doubt in his face. He offered a faint smile, acknowledging her concern. Then she stood, placing a hand on her sword hilt more from habit than threat. "I'll check the perimeter. There've been rumblings that a band of outlaws roams the eastern edge of Tarth. We can't afford them stumbling upon us." With that, she departed, leaving Jon alone with the soft hiss of the dying fire. He thought of the outlaws she'd mentioned. Tarth was no stranger to occasional raiders. If word leaked that a dragon lurked near, unscrupulous men might try to sell that knowledge or take some reckless shot at fame by slaying the beast. The thought made Jon uneasy. He had to ensure the dragon's safety. The camp was far enough from prying eyes, but it wouldn't remain that way if travelers started noticing patterns, boats heading to a hidden inlet, the presence of well-armed knights. He resolved to speak with Brienne more thoroughly about how to guard the cave, or perhaps even coax the dragon to a more remote location if needed. Sleep came to him fitfully that night. In half-lucid dreams, he soared across the storm-swept sky, the silver dragon's roar echoing through clouds. Far below, Rhaegar's harp played a mournful tune. Jon tried to follow the music, but each time he descended, the clouds reformed, obscuring everything in a haze of swirling silver and red. He awoke before dawn, heart pounding, the taste of dryness on his tongue. By the time the sun's first rays lit the horizon, Brienne had returned from her watch. She confirmed that she'd seen a small group of riders inland, armed, but they seemed more like petty thieves than organized sellswords. Still, it was reason enough for caution. Jon decided they would approach the dragon less frequently for a time, varying their schedule to avoid drawing attention. He could not fully sever contact. He owed the dragon consistency, but he wanted to avoid patterns that might betray them if hostile eyes were watching. Over the next week, they visited the dragon every other day, sometimes even skipping 2 days. Jon felt a tug in his chest on the days they abstained, an odd sense of longing. He realized with some surprise how quickly the bond had become part of him. When they did go, they brought fresh fish, goats, the occasional small boar. The dragon's acceptance grew, and it often flew alongside Jon for short excursions around the cliffs. He practiced guiding it gently, with pressure from his knees or a soft pull on the ridges near its neck. Though there was no saddle, no harness, the creature responded more smoothly each time, as if it were learning his cues. He noticed that it was fond of water, frequently skimming the surf or plunging down to snatch larger fish from the shallows. On these hunts, Jon clung tight and tried not to gape at the dragon's agility. It would coil its sleek body, diving with a controlled grace that reminded him more of a bird of prey than the heavier-bodied dragons he'd known. Each successful catch led to a resonant rumble in its throat, almost a draconic purr. While the daily routine settled, rumors did begin to spread. Traveling merchants passing through the nearby hamlets carried whispers of a mysterious winged beast glimpsed over the sea. Some said it was a spirit of the Sapphire Isle, an omen of good fortune. Others claimed it was a demon conjured by red priests. A few recalled the name Targaryen and spoke it like a half-forgotten ghost story. So far, none of these rumors carried enough weight to draw armies to Tarth, but Jon was realistic enough to know that might only be a matter of time. He found solace in small, simple moments when the dragon showed unexpected gentleness. Once, he watched it carefully circle Ghost, leaning down to sniff the direwolf's white fur. Ghost, who had bristled at the first meeting, now merely stood with tail lowered, letting the creature investigate. When the dragon withdrew, Ghost gave a soft bark that might have been a greeting. Jon realized then that no matter what men thought, these two creatures, direwolf and dragon, recognized each other as part of Jon's strange, complicated family. One late afternoon, as golden light streamed through the cave's entrance, Jon was stroking the dragon's scales, feeling the warmth and the pattern of ridges under his palms. He suddenly felt the presence of another, more distant observer. He turned, half expecting Brienne, but saw no one. Yet the feeling persisted. His skin prickled, as though eyes watched from the darkness. The dragon turned its head too, letting out a low growl. Jon tensed, scanning the dim corners. There was nothing, no shape or sound. A trick of the mind, perhaps. But the sensation that something stirred beyond his sight lingered. He took Brienne aside after they departed the cave, confiding his unease. She frowned. "I don't like it. I've heard whispers of men in black hoods skulking around. Might be the same band of outlaws, or might be something else. We'll double our watch." They did just that. And for a time, nothing came of it. Days stretched into nearly 2 weeks of an uneasy peace. The dragon continued to thrive, even venturing out on its own hunts across Tarth's jagged terrain. Occasionally, Jon watched from afar as it flew, the sun gleaming on its silver hide, a sight so wondrous he forgot to breathe. Each time, the dragon returned to the same cave or the nearby cliffs, perhaps tied to that hidden inlet for reasons Jon couldn't fathom. Then, one dusk, trouble arrived. Jon and Brienne were returning from the cave, a small retinue of knights behind them. Boatmen guiding the skiffs through the inlet's narrow throat. The sea was calm, tinted with the pink and lavender hues of sunset. Ghost stood at the prow of one boat, ears alert. As they emerged into open water, a shout went up from a knight. Jon followed the man's pointing finger to see a larger vessel drifting offshore, perhaps half a mile away, bearing no clear flags. Figures moved on its deck, but from this distance, they could not be identified. The boat rocked gently, sails half furled. Jon's instincts prickled. He knew that merchant vessels and fisherfolk typically carried flags or banners, signifying their trade or allegiance. This ship bore none. Its deck bristled with shapes that might be men wearing odd helmets, or possibly hoods. As soon as they spotted Jon's skiffs, the ship's sail unfurled, and it began to move away, heading east. Brienne tensed beside him, her jaw set. "They were watching us," she said. "Could be pirates, could be sellswords. But they were watching." Jon nodded, his gut twisting. "Likely. They'll be back if they suspect something worthwhile. We need to move carefully." Now, they guided their skiffs to shore, keeping an eye on the retreating shape of the suspicious vessel until it vanished in the haze of twilight. Once on the sand, Jon and Brienne hurried to the huts, calling the knights and any nearby fighters to arms. They had no illusions that a small group could hold off a determined force if it arrived by sea. But at least they could be prepared to retreat or conceal themselves if necessary. More importantly, they had to protect the dragon. Jon felt a surge of protective anger rise in him at the thought of unscrupulous men trying to kill or capture the creature. The realm was full of opportunists who might see a living dragon as a path to power or gold. Night fell, but no attack came. The suspicious ship did not return. Still, Jon could not sleep. He paced the shore, Ghost padding silently behind. Brienne took turns with the knights, patrolling the perimeter. The waves glowed faintly under a moonlit sky. Jon paused often to gaze at that faint silver glow upon the water, thinking of the dragon's scales. It felt like a sign, though he knew he was only imposing meaning upon nature's beauty. Finally, he sat near the remains of their driftwood fire, letting the breeze brush through his hair. Ghost settled at his side, warm and solid. Despite his vigilance, exhaustion dogged him, and he dozed in brief intervals, visions dancing behind his eyelids of men creeping ashore with nets and spears. Come morning, no sign of intruders marred the sand. But Brienne discovered footprints inland near a patch of trees. Whether they belonged to the same watchers or a different group was unclear. Jon decided they had waited too long. They needed to relocate their main camp, or at least obscure it further. He also debated whether to coax the dragon to a more remote location. Yet the creature might refuse, or it might simply return to the cave it had claimed. Tarth was an island, after all. Where else could they find such a secluded spot? They resolved to strengthen their guard, move their supplies farther from the beach, deeper into the rocky hills. Over the next few days, they built a hidden cache of food and gear in a narrow crevice, high above the shore. The knights labored with rope and pulleys to haul crates of salted fish and dried bread. Brienne scouted trails along the cliffs to keep watch for strangers. Jon spent hours perched on outcroppings of rock, scanning the horizon for that unnamed vessel. In between these defensive measures, he continued visiting the dragon, maintaining the bond. Each moment with the creature was precious, almost an escape from the tension looming over them. Flying together became more routine, short flights over the coastline, a few longer forays inland, never too far. He grew more adept at shifting his weight, guiding the dragon's path. The beast tolerated his presence with a calm acceptance that was almost gentle. Now and then Jon felt a subtle flicker of warmth in his mind, like a barely audible chord that might signal the first stirrings of a deeper connection. If so, it was a phenomenon he barely understood. Yet with each flight, he knew the risk of being seen increased. Indeed, small groups of shepherds inland caught glimpses. Some spread rumors in hushed awe, claiming the Targaryens had returned in force. Others warned that the skies would soon rain fire. Jon dreaded the news traveling to any great lords. Still, no open threat materialized, and the suspicious ship did not reappear. Time stretched for another fortnight, filled with uneasy vigilance and quiet wonder. The sea winds turned cooler, blowing from the east, carrying scattered storms that lashed the beaches. During one such storm, lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the coastline in staccato bursts of white. Jon stood outside the huts, braced against the gale, when he saw the dragon launch from the cave, wings beating against the rain. It soared through the storm, a silver specter lit by flashes of lightning. He watched with chest-tightening awe, feeling a pull deep in his soul. This was no mere beast. It was a living embodiment of ancient power, a dance of wind and scale that neither man nor nature could wholly tame. In the brilliant flare of one particular lightning bolt, Jon glimpsed a second shape airborne, smaller and darker, trailing behind. His heart jolted. Was there another dragon, or had he merely seen a trick of the light? He strained his eyes, searching the roiling clouds, but the next bolts revealed only the silver dragon, alone. Rain soaked him to the bone, ghost whining at his side. Jon told himself it was an illusion, a shadow cast by the clouds or lightning. Yet a kernel of doubt lodged in his mind, refusing to let go. When the storm abated, he ventured to the cave at dawn, soaked cloak heavy around his shoulders. The dragon was there, perched on a rocky shelf, droplets cascading down its scales. It showed no sign of injury, no trace of conflict, so perhaps it had flown alone. Still, Jon couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen another silhouette. The possibility that a second dragon existed, hidden somewhere. The thought was overwhelming. But the silver beast gave him no answers, merely accepted the fish he brought, and huffed in mild amusement at his dripping state. That day, as Brienne and Jon spoke in low tones near a sheltered corner of the cave, she told him she'd found more footprints inland, a cluster of them, suggesting half a dozen armed men. They seemed to be circling the area, perhaps probing for a vantage point. Jon scowled, scanning the shadows. "We can't hide forever, and we can't simply vanish with the dragon in tow," he muttered. "If these men are scouting for a bigger force, we might be outnumbered soon." Brienne set her jaw. "We may need to move the dragon, or have it fly somewhere safer." Jon's chest tightened. Where would that be? Anywhere in Westeros. It would attract attention. Traveling to Essos is just as dangerous, and I don't know if the dragon would follow. It might choose to remain here, its home. For all we know, it's lived in these caves for years. Mandan. Brienne's expression hardened with resolve. "Then we hold, and we prepare. We can defend this place if we must. I'll not let a band of brigands or petty mercenaries endanger the realm's last living dragon, nor the man who rides it." Jon felt gratitude rise in his chest. He squeezed Brienne's arm gently, mindful of her bruised plates. She had sworn an oath to protect the innocent, to uphold the good. Perhaps that oath extended even to a fabled monster and the reluctant Targaryen who found himself bonded to it. "We'll do what we must," he said softly, turning to face the dragon. Its golden eyes swept between them, as though it sensed the tension. The time for illusions of safety was ending. The precarious peace they'd clung to was slipping away, and soon they would have to decide how far they were willing to go to defend the secret that had become their charge. The dragon unfurled its wings then, shaking off droplets of water, and for a heartbeat, Jon thought of Rhaegar's silver harp echoing in the corners of this damp cavern. He felt the faint hum in his blood again, that intangible link he couldn't fully name. Perhaps the gods had woven threads from the past, binding father to son through the unlikeliest of mediums. A hidden dragon that shimmered with moonlight. But gods and prophecies aside, practical dangers loomed like thunderclouds. Men were searching. Ambitions stirred. He could sense it as surely as he felt the pounding of the dragon's heartbeat under his hand. He guided the creature out onto the rocky ledge, the sky still heavy with departing storm clouds. The beast lifted its slender head, tasting the moist air, then turned to Jon. He stepped forward, resting a palm against its jaw. "Whatever comes," he murmured, "I won't abandon you." The dragon blinked slowly, a gesture Jon almost fancied was understanding. He knew it was folly to assign human emotions to such a creature. Yet he felt the resonance of something deeper. Together, they stood on the threshold, the vastness of the sea before them, the unknown behind. And Jon, once a boy of Winterfell, once a man of the Night's Watch, now a Targaryen in truth, felt his destiny coiling around him like a gathering storm. He closed his eyes, letting the salt wind whip across his face, swearing silently that he would protect this dragon at all costs, and in doing so, perhaps find some measure of redemption for the blood he carried in his veins. Okay. Jon rested a hand on the dragon's warm flank, feeling the soft rise and fall of its breath as the storm clouds overhead thinned. The wind still carried a wet chill, hinting at further tempests to come. But for the moment, the dragon stood poised on the rocky ledge with regal calm. The beast's glossy scales shimmered in the muted daylight, silver tinted by the water sheening its hide. Watching it like this, Jon felt a fleeting peace, as though the world had momentarily paused in reverence. He became aware of Brienne's presence behind him, boots scraping the stone. She kept a respectful distance, giving the dragon space. Jon turned, meeting her steady gaze. She studied his face, the lines of fatigue and worry evident in his eyes. No one spoke for a few heartbeats. Then the dragon shifted its weight, exhaling a rumble that vibrated in Jon's chest. He drew back from its side, letting his fingers slide over the smooth ridges of its scales. They left the creature to its thoughts on the ledge, and made their way down the winding tunnel that led to the cave's entrance. Torchlight flickered over the slick walls, casting moving shadows. Jon touched the hilt of Long Claw out of habit, feeling an undercurrent of tension thrumming through his limbs. Brienne remained close, scanning every crevice for signs of lurking danger. Farther behind, two of the knights carried a crate of supplies: salted fish, dried meat, bandages. The tide had risen, sending echoes of rushing water through the cavern. Outside, the inlet reflected a bruise-colored sky. Their two boats bobbed near the rocky shelf, each manned by a watchful boatman. As Jon approached, he noticed that one of the men on the nearest skiff, a wiry fellow with thinning hair, kept glancing anxiously at the mouth of the inlet, as though half expecting more black-sailed ships to slip through the gloom. Brienne set a cautious foot on the boat's plank. "We'll return before sunset," she told the boatman, her tone clipped. "Try not to stay out in the open. If you must fish, keep to the coves where you won't be easily spotted." The boatman nodded, worry lines etched in his weathered face. "You can count on it, my lady." His eyes flicked to Jon and quickly away, as if unsure how to address him. Jon had grown used to such hesitation. Even now, people were uncertain whether to call him "Your Grace," "My Lord," or simply "Jon." He offered a tight nod and stepped onto the boat. Ghost followed lithely, jumping from rock to wood with a deftness that belied the wolf's size. They rowed out into the open water. The tide roiled from the night storm, swells rising and falling with a steady rhythm. As they exited the hidden inlet, Jon scanned the horizon. No sign of the suspicious vessel that had unnerved them days ago. Clouds drifted in patches, revealing slices of pale sunlight here and there. Seabirds wheeled overhead crying out, but the sea itself was mostly empty. Only the endless gray stretch met his gaze. He exhaled slowly. They disembarked on the familiar stretch of Tarth's beach, the sand a dark tan color flecked with crushed shells. The huts and tents they had once used as a makeshift camp were no longer so obvious. In the past weeks, they'd torn down several of the structures, scattering them to reduce any noticeable signs of a settlement. The few that remained were hidden among boulders and tall seagrasses. Any traveler wandering by might think them the remnants of a tiny fishing outpost, if they thought of them at all. As Jon stepped ashore, Ghost bounded ahead to sniff the driftwood that had washed up overnight. Brienne followed, hand on the pommel of her sword. Two of the knights came up behind with the crate, boots sinking in the wet sand. The rest of their party fanned out, each scanning the dunes for any trace of footprints left by lurking enemies. They found none, but the tension remained, like a string pulled taut. Jon helped Brienne carry the crate inland, weaving between low dunes tufted with windswept grasses. A short climb brought them to a natural hollow in the rocky terrain where they'd been storing supplies. It was hidden behind an overhang, the entrance partly concealed by tall shrubs. The interior was cool and dim, smaller than the cave the dragon inhabited, but serviceable for their purposes. As they secured the supplies, Brienne glanced back toward the beach. "We should plan another sweep of the coastline soon. The men you saw inland might have circled back." Jon hefted the last bundle of salted fish onto a makeshift shelf. "Agreed. I'll take a small party at dawn. We'll search the eastern ridge. I've heard rumors from the fishermen that the outlaws have a campsite in the highlands." She nodded, satisfied, and motioned for one of the knights to remain on watch at the hollow's entrance. The rest followed her back down toward the beach. Ghost ran ahead, ears pricked. For a moment, Jon stood alone, listening to the distant rush of the sea. He tried not to dwell on how precarious their situation was. The realm had known too many wars, too many kings. If word spread beyond rumor that a Targaryen with a dragon was hidden on Tarth, half the lords of Westeros would scramble to exploit it or destroy it. He clenched his jaw, forcing those fears aside for now. There were immediate concerns. The Watchers inland, a possible band of sellswords or pirates. One threat at a time. When he rejoined the others on the sand, the boatmen were already shoving off, planning to gather what shellfish they could before the next tide. Brienne and the knights were heading toward a rocky slope that afforded a wider view of the shoreline. Jon followed, picking his way across slick stones. The sky above remained restless, clouds shifting in uncertain patterns of gray and pale sunlight. The wind held a hint of sharper chill, a reminder that spring was not yet fully settled. Atop the slope, he found Brienne with her arms crossed, scanning the horizon with keen focus. A stray lock of hair brushed across her cheek in the wind. She pointed inland, where the land rose into rolling hills dotted by stunted pine trees. "I saw movement there last night," she said. "Flickers of torchlight, perhaps half a mile away. Could be travelers, could be a scouting party." Jon narrowed his eyes, following the line of her pointing finger. The hills looked empty now, but as he stared, he thought he saw a faint shimmer. Sunlight glancing off metal, maybe. His pulse quickened. He tried to measure how many men might hide in those folds of land. A large force would have left more obvious signs. Perhaps it was a small but persistent group. "Uncertain," he said. "We'll know soon enough." They stood together in silence for a moment, the wind whipping at their cloaks. Ghost arrived at Jon's side, panting softly, then lifted his muzzle to sniff the air. Jon patted the wolf's head absently, his thoughts drifting to the dragon that even now likely soared somewhere beyond the cliffs, free from these ground-bound worries. Brienne's voice pulled him back. "There's another matter. One of the knights claims to have discovered footprints near the cove where we first landed. They're not ours. They lead away east, into the rocky gullies." "Nest." Jon felt a prickle of tension. How fresh. Brienne pursed her lips. He guessed a day old, no more. Jon ground his teeth thoughtfully. So the Watchers were not content to remain on the outskirts. They were circling ever closer. Sooner or later, an encounter was inevitable. He considered how to best respond. A direct confrontation might spook them, or worse, prompt them to call for reinforcements. Yet letting them roam freely risked them stumbling upon the dragon's cave. His mind churned with uncertain scenarios. Late that afternoon, he assembled a scouting party of 5 knights, himself, and Ghost. They took a circuitous route inland, aiming to skirt the rocky gullies from the north, where vantage points were better. Brienne stayed behind to guard the main stash of supplies, her presence necessary to organize the men and maintain discipline. Before Jon departed, she caught his arm. "Do not take unnecessary risks. We need you, and the realm needs that dragon safe." "Nadamni." Jon nodded, trying to quell the sense of inevitability that rose in him. "I'll be careful." They set off in a loose formation, each knight carrying a small shield and a short bow in addition to a sword. Jon kept Longclaw sheathed at his hip, his eyes sweeping the terrain for any flicker of movement. Ghost ranged ahead, silent as his namesake, occasionally pausing to sniff at the ground or prick his ears at some distant sound. The land climbed gradually, offering a patchwork of rocky outcroppings and low, gnarled pines. Sparse grasses wavered in the wind. Occasionally, they passed remnants of old campsites, fire pits, scattered ashes, but none seemed fresh. The sky began to bruise in the west, the sun slipping low behind a belt of darker cloud. Jon pressed on despite the approaching dusk. If watchers lurked nearby, he wanted to find them, not wait for them to slip away under cover of night. At last, they reached a vantage point overlooking a shallow ravine. The slope below was dotted with shrubs and riddled with crumbling stone that made for treacherous footing. One of the knights muttered, "Could hide an entire regiment down there, and we'd never see them." The man peered through the lengthening shadows with a frown. Jon studied the terrain, ignoring the creeping chill in the air. He gestured for one knight to circle left while another circled right, each scanning for signs of passage. The rest remained near him, forming a watchful cluster. Ghost prowled at the edge of the ravine, ears rigid. Then the wolf froze, muzzle pointed downward, releasing a low growl. Jon's heart quickened. He crept forward, careful of loose stones, and peered into the ravine. He caught sight of a slender column of smoke rising from behind a boulder. Too small to be a natural brush fire, more likely a hidden cook fire. His mind raced. If outlaws were camped down there, they might notice his party at any moment. Yet he couldn't see how many. Motioning for silence, Jon beckoned the 2 knights back. They reconvened in hushed murmurs, deciding to circle the ravine from opposite sides and attempt a closer look. He took one knight with him along the western edge, stepping carefully around boulders and clumps of thorny brush. Ghost moved ahead, light-footed. The sun sank further, painting the sky with red and gold streaks. Shadows lengthened, and the flickering smoke became more obvious. The low crackle of a small fire reached Jon's ears. They descended partway into the ravine, hearts thumping. Then, a shout rang out, a rough voice echoing off the rocks. Jon cursed under his breath. They'd been spotted. Instantly, Ghost leapt forward with a snarl. 4 figures rose from behind a jumble of stones, armed with bows and short blades. One let loose an arrow that ricocheted off a rock near Jon's left foot. The knight beside Jon raised his shield, eyes wide, and tried to return fire with his own shortbow. Jon drew Longclaw, the familiar weight steadying him. Another arrow whipped past, lodging in a crevice. Ghost sprang at the nearest assailant, fangs bared. The man cried out in alarm, stumbling back. Jon rushed forward, using the terrain to his advantage. He slashed at a second assailant who lunged with a crude sword. The man was untrained, telegraphing his swing. Jon easily parried and struck him down with a swift blow. The third fired an arrow that grazed the knight's shoulder. Jon saw red blossoming on the man's surcoat, but the wound didn't appear lethal. With a roar, the knight swung his sword, forcing the archer to retreat. Meanwhile, the 4th assailant turned to run, clearly seeking to warn others or escape. Ghost, however, cut him off, snapping at his legs. The man stumbled, tripped over loose stones, and fell hard with a grunt of pain. The entire skirmish lasted barely a dozen heartbeats. 2 men lay wounded, one cowering with arms over his head, and the last unconscious or dead from Jon's blow. Jon stood over the cowering man, breath ragged. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What do you want on this isle?" His words echoed harshly in the ravine's stillness. The man pressed himself to the rock, eyes wild and fearful. "We're just sellswords, my lord. The Ebony Blade. We were hired to watch for rumors of a dragon," he gasped out. A trembling hand moved to wipe the blood from his cheek. "Didn't mean trouble, just told to gather intel, that's all." John felt a knot tighten in his gut. Ghost prowled behind the man, lips curled in a silent snarl. John motioned for the knight to disarm the sellsword. Then he knelt, setting the tip of Longclaw near the man's throat. "Who hired you?" The man's eyes flicked from Ghost's fangs to John's blade. "I don't know names. We only had a black-bearded man as our contact in the Stormlands. Claimed to represent a wealthy patron. Gave us coin. Told us to hunt for signs of a silver dragon. Word traveled from the fisherman routes. That's all." John pressed the steel closer to the man's skin. "And if you found this dragon?" The sellsword swallowed. "We were to send word by Raven to an inn near the Wendwater, in the Stormlands. Then we'd get further instructions. More coin." His voice quavered. He flicked a glance at the knight's drawn sword. "Look, we're no match for a real army. We needed coin." From behind, the second knight, who had circled the ravine, arrived, breathless. Sword at the ready, he took in the scene. The wounded, the cowering sellsword, the unconscious bodies. John's mind raced. A wealthy patron in the Stormlands. They must suspect the dragon's existence, even if details were scarce. If these men had a raven or some means of contact, more would follow. The question gnawed at John. Which lord or faction in the Stormlands sought to glean this information? He said, "Show me your raven or your letters." The sellsword shook his head, terrified. "We have no raven on us, my lord. Our captain carried a scroll tube. He left 3 days ago. Said he'd ride for a better vantage. See if he could spot the dragon in flight. We were only told to keep watch near the shore." John slowly withdrew Longclaw, leaving the sellsword to huddle against the stone. He motioned for one of the knights to bind him. The others checked the unconscious men. One was dead, the other two severely wounded. John let out a grim sigh. "Tend to them if you can," he told the knight. "I don't want needless death." The knight gave a curt nod, though he eyed the sellswords with obvious distaste. Ghost paced, unsettled by the stench of blood. John rubbed the direwolf's neck to soothe him, then crouched again near the captive. "Your captain. Where is he likely to go?" "Mudin." The man spat on the ground. "Didn't say. Maybe the higher hills, maybe near Evenfall Hall. Don't know." His voice was a whimper. "Will you let us go?" John studied him, recalling the times he'd grappled with the moral consequences of letting dangerous men walk free. "If I do, you'll just return to your masters and report everything." The sellsword hunched his shoulders, looking at the blood on the rocks. "We had no quarrel with you personally. We never saw the dragon. Only signs. That's the truth." John noted the desperation in his voice. These men were no unstoppable force, only a handful of mercenaries scraping a living in the chaos. Still, they threatened everything he was trying to protect. His jaw tightened as he stood. "Take them. We'll decide their fate once we return to camp." The knights gathered the surviving sellswords. The dead man was left behind, as carrying him would slow them, though they covered his face out of a modicum of respect. Ghost kept close watch on the captives, baring his teeth whenever they faltered. Night pressed in more rapidly now. By the time the party made it back to the beach, darkness had settled. A cold wind scoured the shoreline. Brienne met them with a grim expression, a pair of torches in hand. She surveyed the captives, her eyes narrowing. "So we have confirmation. They were indeed watching for the dragon?" John exhaled, nodding. "They have a captain somewhere inland. But the core of it is this. Someone in the Stormlands pays them to track rumors of a silver dragon. That alone means we've lost whatever secrecy we once had." "Ninate." Brienne's gaze flicked to the bound sellswords, who stood hunched and miserable in the torchlight. Salt spray dotted their hair and clothes. She turned back to John. We'll keep them under guard. If you want them questioned further, we can do so at dawn." Jon considered the possibility of gleaning more information from them, but he felt a weariness in his bones that eclipsed the immediate desire for answers. "Put them in the far hut under watch," he said. "We'll speak with them come morning." He turned to the knights, voice heavy with unspoken worry. "None of this leaves our circle. Understood?" The more who talk, the faster word spreads. They nodded, though fear and determination mingled in their eyes. Jon wondered if any of them secretly questioned his right to give commands. But they had followed him this far, trusting his judgment as a leader, and he saw no sign of rebellion now. Brienne barked orders, sending the knights to reinforce the guard. The sellswords were shuffled off, heads down, escorted by 4 armed men. Ghost trailed behind, still growling softly whenever one of them looked up. Jon lingered at the edge of the firelight, letting the ocean wind whip across his face. The night sky spread overhead, scattered with faint stars, still half obscured by drifting clouds. He tried to gather his thoughts. The Ebony Blade mercenaries were only the first wave of trouble. Others might follow, or the same patron might hire more men to converge on Tarth. Would it come to a pitched battle on these shores? Could he risk calling for allies of his own? He hated the idea of inviting fresh conflict to a land already weary from war. But the dragon was too important, and too vulnerable if faced with overwhelming numbers. Then there was the question of Daenerys off in Essos. If word reached her, how would she react? Would she expect him to cede the dragon to her or to join her? Uncertainty tugged at him, fueling his restlessness. Brienne finished handing off command of the night watch. She approached Jon, her face half lit by the wavering fire. "You should sleep," she said gently, though the hardness in her gaze showed she was prepared to do otherwise if danger loomed. "I'll remain on guard." Jon almost scoffed at the notion of sleep, but exhaustion pressed on him like an invisible weight. "I'll try," he murmured, raking a hand through his hair. He nodded, then turned to make his way to the half-hidden hut where he sometimes rested. Ghost padded after him, no doubt also weary from the day's exertions. The knight on duty inclined his head to Jon as he passed, a mark of respect that Jon scarcely felt he deserved in this moment. He managed a curt nod in return. Inside the hut, the air was close, smelling of old rushes and sea damp. A small lantern flickered, revealing a simple bedroll and a rough table. The wind outside rattled the hut's loose boards. Jon sank onto the bedroll, propping Longclaw against the wall within easy reach. Ghost settled by the doorway, watchful as ever. For a long time, Jon sat with his back against the wall, eyes half-lidded, trying to quiet the swirl of thoughts. He wondered if the silver dragon had already returned to its cave, or if it still roamed the night sky. He found himself picturing it circling above, scanning for threats with those golden eyes. Slumber claimed him at some uncertain hour, pulling him into half-formed dreams. He saw Rhaegar's face superimposed over the silver dragon's, heard the whisper of prophecy in a language he did not recognize. Then the dream shifted, and he was in the crypts of Winterfell again, hearing Lyanna's voice calling his name. He tried to answer, but no sound came. Shadows pressed in, swirling with the echo of distant wings. The hush of fear and yearning tangled in his chest. He woke abruptly to the sound of raised voices outside. It was still dark. Moonlight filtered through the gaps in the hut's walls. Ghost had already bolted upright, hackles raised. Jon grabbed Longclaw and pushed aside the door, stepping into the chill of the pre-dawn. He saw torches bobbing near the far hut, where the captives were held. Armored figures clustered around the doorway. A muffled shout rang out, followed by a crash. Jon strode across the sand, heart pounding. Brienne materialized from the shadows, meeting him halfway. "They tried to escape," she said, voice bristling with anger. "One of them managed to knock out a guard with a hidden blade. We've recaptured them." Jon's jaw clenched as he reached the hut. Inside, 2 knights held the cowering sellswords at sword point. One of the guards lay slumped against a crate, blood streaking his temple, though he appeared to be alive, just dazed. The captives were wide-eyed with fear. Their arms were once again bound behind their backs, and one had fresh bruises on his cheek. Torchlight cast jagged shadows across the scene. Jon's gaze bored into the leader of the group, the same man who had spoken before. "Seems you're eager to prove yourselves a threat." The man swallowed, glancing at his two fellow captives. We thought we might stand a chance while your camp slept. I only want to avoid torture or a noose." His voice trembled, but there was a defiance in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Jon felt the temptation to condemn them outright. Yet these men were only pawns. "Who is your patron in the Stormlands? Give me a name or a sigil," he demanded. "You must know more than a black-bearded contact." The man licked his lips, eyes darting from Brienne's sword to Jon's. "He never spoke a lord's name. We only heard talk of a castle near the Shipbreaker Bay, someone with money to spend. We suspect it might be some lesser cousin of Lord Selwyn Tarth, or maybe a retainer from House Baratheon's old line, but we truly don't know." He shrank back as Brienne stepped closer. "We swear on the Seven." Jon's mind reeled. The idea that someone connected to Tarth's own ruling family might be complicit in hunting the dragon was unsettling. But Tarth had fractured nobility after so much war. Rival claimants, vassals, or opportunists might be around. Then again, it could be a red herring. The Stormlands were vast, and many lords or exiled knights might have coin enough to hire sellswords. "What else do you know?" "Only that our captain said something about waiting for instructions from a certain spymaster, or maybe a go-between," the man stammered. "He wouldn't share details. We're at the bottom rung, see?" Before Jon could press further, the battered guard groaned from the corner, trying to sit up. Brienne went to help him, her expression dark with anger. Jon felt a knot of frustration in his chest. The captives would only tell what they knew, which wasn't enough to unravel the mystery. He clenched his fists. He could have them tortured, but that thought brought a sour taste to his mouth. He would not stoop to such brutality without dire need. These men likely had revealed all they truly knew. He turned to Brienne. "Lock them in the storage cellar, post 2 guards, take their shoes and belts so they can't easily run. Bind their ankles if needed." The captives paled at that, but made no protest. They knew well enough they were at Jon's mercy. As the knights hauled them out into the night, Jon helped the injured guard stand. The man had a nasty bump on his forehead, but he was coherent. "My lord," the guard whispered, shame coloring his tone. "I let down my guard. Won't happen again." Jon clasped his shoulder. "You're alive. That's what matters." He ushered him toward one of the other huts, where they could tend his wound. Brienne trailed behind, silent and fierce, checking each shadow as though expecting another ambush. Dawn broke in a pale wash of light across Tarth's shore. Jon squinted at the horizon, exhaustion tugging at his eyelids. He was about to return to the half-hidden hut when a distant roar broke the morning hush. All heads turned toward the sky. The sound was unmistakable. A dragon's call. It sent a ripple of alarm through the knights, who scattered to find vantage points along the shore. Jon ran to the water's edge, heart hammering, searching the sky for that flash of silver. He spotted it glinting near the distant cliffs. The dragon soared in a wide arc, letting out another roar that resonated across the waves. Jon's breath caught. Something in its tone sounded agitated, a deeper urgency than before. He remembered the primal bond he'd felt with the creature, as though they could sense each other's tension. Ghost bounded to Jon's side, ears erect. The watchers inland might see this display, might confirm all their suspicions, but Jon couldn't exactly command the dragon to remain hidden. It was a living being, free in the sky. Brienne came up beside him. "It doesn't sound pleased," she said, concern etched in her features. "Do you think it senses danger?" Jon stared at the swirling clouds around the high cliffs, where the dragon's silhouette curved gracefully, then dipped lower. He thought of the watchers, the mercenaries, the possibility of more ships. "I can't say," he replied softly, "but I should go to it. Better it land safely near the cave than roam the skies in broad daylight where all can see." Brienne fixed him with a determined look. "You can't go alone. Let me gather a few men." Jon shook his head. "We've enough trouble here. If more sellswords come, I need men to defend the beach, and our captives. I'll only bring 1 or 2 with me to the inlet. If something happens, you must hold them off until I return." She opened her mouth to protest, then shut it. realizing there was no easy solution. Finally, she nodded. "As you say. But be careful. If that ship returns, or if more men approach from inland, you'll be surrounded between them and the sea." Jon managed a thin smile that did not reach his eyes. "I've been surrounded before." He assembled 2 knights, men he trusted for their level-headedness, along with 1 boatman to row. Together, they launched a small skiff into the choppy waters of early morning, heading for the hidden inlet. The silver dragon continued to circle overhead, occasionally letting out that deep, resonant cry. Each time, it set Jon's nerves on edge, as if the beast were calling him onward. Their approach through the inlet was nerve-wracking. The tide had receded slightly, but they navigated the narrow passage carefully, hoping no enemy had discovered this route. The boatman's weathered hands gripped the oars, pulling them steadily along, eyes darting toward the rocks. The knights clutched shortbows, scanning for any sign of ambush, but the only motion was the swirl of foam against the stone. They docked at the small ledge inside the cavern. Jon jumped out first, steadying the boat. Ghost followed with a silent bound. The knights doused the torches they'd carried. Enough light filtered from the cave mouth to guide their steps. A hush fell, broken only by the distant drip of water from stalactites. "Stay with the skiff," Jon told the boatman. "If I call, be ready to pull out fast." The boatman nodded, face grim. Jon and the 2 knights ventured deeper, following the tunnel's curve. Memories flickered through Jon's mind. The first time he'd laid eyes on the dragon's glowing eyes in the darkness. The first time he'd touched its scales. Now the air felt charged. He could hear a restless scratching sound, faint but unmistakable, like claws scraping stone. Rounding a bend, he saw the dragon. It crouched on the rocky floor near its makeshift nest of driftwood, wings partially unfurled. Its head swung toward them, golden eyes reflecting the torchlight. A low rumble echoed through the chamber. At once, Jon sensed agitation. The beast's tail lashed, scattering a few loose bones across the floor. He motioned for the knights to hold back, then moved closer, hands open at his sides. "Easy," he murmured, voice soft. "I'm here." The dragon's gaze locked onto him, the pupils slitting. Jon steadied his breath, feeling his heart pound. "It's all right," he said gently, approaching step by step. The dragon emitted a hiss, but it did not back away. Jon reached its flank, pressing a tentative hand to the warm scales. The creature's breathing was rapid, as if it had flown hard or was in distress. He ran his palm along the ridges, trying to convey reassurance. Slowly, the dragon's tail stopped lashing. Its gaze shifted, taking in the 2 knights who lingered at a respectful distance. Jon glanced around, seeking a cause for the dragon's unrest. Nothing seemed amiss. No intruders, no signs of fresh battle. Then he noticed that some of the dragon's driftwood nest was scattered, as if the creature had been pacing in circles. Had it sensed the confrontation with the sellswords? Or was it responding to some deeper call that Jon couldn't fathom? He turned back to the dragon, quietly letting the calm of the moment settle between them. "We'll be more vigilant," he whispered, as though it might somehow understand. The beast blinked slowly, head tilting. Jon could almost imagine intelligence stirring behind those golden eyes. Perhaps it truly did sense that the world beyond was closing in. One knight approached gingerly, setting down a small cask of fish they had brought, in case the dragon needed to eat. The creature sniffed, but did not lunge at the offering. Its wings rustled. Jon considered coaxing it outside for a flight, hoping fresh air might ease its agitation. But daylight was creeping across Tarth, and more watchers might be out there. Every time the dragon appeared in the open sky, the risk grew. "Wait here," he told the knights. "I'll try to see if it wants to stretch its wings. If we're quick, we might avoid detection." They nodded, though Jon could sense their unease. Even the boatman's voice drifted from around the corner, calling softly to ask if all was well. Jon ran his hand along the dragon's flank once more, then moved toward the cave mouth that opened onto the ledge. The creature followed, long claws clicking on stone. Ghost padded behind, though he kept a wary distance from those massive talons. Together, they emerged onto the rocky ledge that overlooked the inlet. Sunlight spilled through the rolling clouds, illuminating the dragon's scales in a blinding gleam of silver. It was beautiful, brightening, a living wonder. The dragon peered over the water, letting out a low rumble that resonated in Joan's chest. He felt a pull in his blood, the same bond that had guided them on past flights. Slowly he climbed onto the creature's shoulders, hands gripping the ridges for balance. The dragon arched its neck, glancing back at him with a flicker of those slit pupil eyes. Then it spread its wings wide, the membrane catching the early sun. In one powerful leap, it took to the air. Jon clutched the ridges, pressing himself low against the dragon's body. A rush of wind pummeled him, carrying salt spray from the inlet's churning waters below. The knights and boatmen on the ledge shrank into the distance as the creature rose, beating its wings in strong, measured strokes. They cleared the cliff and emerged into open sky. Clouds drifted overhead, their edges gleaming like hammered silver. Jon's breath caught. Far below, he saw Tarth's coastline sweeping in ragged lines, the beach where Brienne and the others stood watch. The wind tore at him, colder here in the upper air. Yet the dragon flew with steady purpose, cutting through the sky like an arrow. He glanced down to check for any sign of suspicious ships or camps. Nothing obvious. The sea stretched calm, dotted by only a handful of small fishing vessels. Inland, the forests and hills were patchy with morning mist. The dragon roared again, though this time it lacked the frantic edge from earlier. Jon sensed it was releasing tension, or perhaps announcing its presence to the wide world. He prayed no watchers lurked in the hills with crossbows or scorpions. The realm had seen enough such weapons. He leaned forward, murmuring quiet words he hoped might convey a desire to head back toward the cave. The dragon, however, continued a wide arc, as if wanting to taste the freedom of flight a bit longer. Jon's pulse pounded in a mixture of awe and worry. They circled the coastline, following the curve of the cliffs until the inlet lay behind them. The morning sun revealed new sights, a flock of white gulls racing alongside them in the wind. The shimmer of a hidden cove with turquoise waters. Jon tightened his grip, resisting the urge to let out a wild laugh at the sheer exhilaration of it. Even weighed down by cares, flight with a dragon was a rare and profound joy. But reason prevailed. He gently guided the creature back, tugging on those ridges in a pattern he'd used before. It responded, banking to the left, heading toward the rocky heights above the main cove. Jon scanned the terrain for any sign of watchers, heart in his throat. Ghostly pines clung to the slopes. Rocks glinted in the sun. Then he saw it. A small figure far below, perched on a ridge. The figure was entirely cloaked, face hidden, but definitely staring up at them. Jon's blood chilled. The watchers were indeed here, or one of them at least, braving the dawn to see if the dragon took flight. Before Jon could fully process, the figure vanished behind a boulder. Likely, they'd just collected all the proof they needed. The silver dragon soared the skies of Tarth, carrying a rider. Fury and dread tangled in Jon's gut. But to chase them from the air would risk losing control, or leaving the man time to slip away. He needed to act carefully, not in blind rage. He urged the dragon to descend toward the inlet again, trusting Brienne to handle any confrontation on the ground if it came to it. The creature beat its wings, descending in a powerful dive that made Jon's stomach lurch. Spray exploded where the waves smashed against the rocks. They backwinged at the last moment, stirring a gale of air in the cove. The knights on the ledge braced themselves. The boatman nearly dropped to his knees, eyes bulging at the sudden rush. Jon dismounted, stumbling slightly. The dragon snorted, folding its wings. His two knights rushed forward. One asked, "My lord, is anything amiss?" Jon raked a hand through his wind-tangled hair. "We were seen. A cloaked figure on the western ridge. No time to identify them. They'll likely run to share the news." Benim Durha. The knights exchanged uneasy glances. One said, "Shall we go after them, my lord?" Jon felt a surge of frustration. They have too much of a head start and we don't know the terrain well enough. He glanced at the dragon, which had begun pacing with restless energy, claws scraping the stone. "We could try, but it's risky. The man may already be gone." A heavy silence fell. The boatman rubbed his beard anxiously. "This is ill news, sire. Soon half the Stormlands might know for certain there's a Targaryen rider on Tarth. Then Jon bowed his head, rubbing the tension from the back of his neck. The boatman's fear was valid. The fragile secrecy had cracked. The question was how quickly it would shatter. Finally, he looked up, meeting the knight's eyes. "We return to the main camp," he said. "We must warn Lady Brienne and prepare for the consequences." He patted the dragon's flank, murmuring an apology for the abrupt flight. Then he placed his hand gently on its chest, feeling the thunder of its heartbeat. "Stay safe," he whispered, though the words were for his own comfort as much as the creature's. The dragon regarded him solemnly, as if sensing his worry. Then it stalked back into the cavern, wings dragging slightly, tail lashing the air. Jon watched it vanish into the shadows, feeling as if he left a piece of his heart behind. They boarded the skiff, crossing the inlet in subdued silence. Ghost stood at the prow, ears flattened. Each stroke of the oar sounded louder than usual, echoing Jon's racing thoughts. If the Watchers spread the word quickly, a flood of new sellswords, knights, or even lords might descend upon Tarth, each with their own agenda: to kill or claim the dragon, to capture or coerce Jon. And if the rumors reached Daenerys, or any of the other great houses who still remembered the Targaryen name, Jon closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on him. The tide was rising again, making the final approach to the beach more difficult. Waves buffeted the skiff. One knight had to help the boatman hold the craft steady. When they finally stumbled ashore, Brienne was there, flanked by 2 knights and a cluster of tense onlookers, fisherfolk who had glimpsed the dragon overhead. Her eyes sharpened the moment she saw Jon's face. "We have trouble," she said flatly, as though reading his mind. Jon nodded. "A watcher on the western ridge. He saw the dragon, saw me riding it." He took a breath. "He vanished before we could act." She pressed her lips into a thin line. "Then we must assume the worst. We'll double the guard, secure the captives. My guess is that the Watcher's captain or spymaster will send word beyond Tarth soon, if they haven't already." Darwar. A hush spread among the gathered folk, each face etched with a mix of awe and dread. Jon scanned them, the ones who had discreetly helped him, and the dragon all this time. They looked at him now with flickers of uncertainty. He realized that while they respected him, few truly wished to become embroiled in a conflict that might burn their shores. They were fisherfolk, boatmen, and ordinary souls wanting to live in peace. He felt a pang of guilt. Clearing his throat, he addressed them. "You've been loyal beyond what I could ask. Now I fear war or trouble might follow. If any of you want to leave, seek safer harbors. I will not hold it against you. Take what supplies you need. I cannot promise Tarth will remain peaceful." One older fisherman raised his hand, shaking his head. "This isle is my home, my lord. Where would I go? I've made it this far through storms and wars." His words, though quietly spoken, carried a stubborn dignity. Others murmured agreement or offered uncertain shrugs. Not all were eager to flee, though a few looked torn. Brienne watched them, then turned to Jon. "We can't protect them all from an invading force. We may need to concentrate our defenses near the cave, or—" Her voice trailed off, as if the next suggestion was too grim. Jon knew what she meant. They could consider moving the dragon, perhaps to a hidden cove along the southern coast, or even attempt to sail it off Tarth's shores. But the idea seemed nearly impossible. Dragons did not meekly board ships, and the Silver Beast might refuse to leave. Worse, if any ship tracked them at sea, they'd be trapped. He shook his head slowly, the turmoil plain on his face. "We stay," he said. "We fortify as best we can. If an army comes, we'll do what we must, but I won't abandon the dragon to face them alone, and I won't bring war upon more distant shores." He glanced at Brienne. "Unless you advise otherwise." She studied him for a long moment. Then she shook her head. "No, I won't advise it. My sword and shield are yours, Jon. Like it or not, I'll stand with you." She lifted her chin, her voice resounding with quiet conviction. Jon felt a surge of gratitude for her steadfast loyalty, and with it came the ghost of a memory. Ned Stark's voice telling him that true friends are worth more than gold. Perhaps that was the only real solace he could cling to now. The realm might descend upon them tomorrow, but Brienne the knights and these fisherfolk stood beside him. It had to be enough. He summoned the knights, forging plans as best he could, doubling perimeter patrols, placing watchers on high vantage points, ensuring the captives remained tightly secured. He also asked Brienne to work with the fisherfolk on contingency plans, routes for evacuation if a larger force landed. No matter how this played out, he wanted as few innocents caught in the crossfire as possible. As the morning wore on, the camp stirred with tension. Men sharpened swords and checked bows. Fishermen prepared smaller craft for possible evacuation. The captives huddled under guard, uncertain if they would be executed or used as bargaining chips. Jon moved among them all, giving instructions with a calm he did not entirely feel. Inside, his heart pounded with the knowledge that soon, the dance of secrecy would end, and open conflict might begin. He stole a moment near midday to go to the crest of a dune overlooking the shore. There, he knelt, letting the wind buffet his hair, the sunlight prick at his eyes. Ghost stood beside him, quiet and watchful. Jon gazed out at the sea, a shimmering field of gray and blue, flecked with white where the waves broke. He thought of the past, of Ned Stark's quiet strength, of the words Rhaegar Targaryen might have spoken had he lived, that the dragon must have 3 heads, that prophecy was a double-edged blade. Jon had never yearned for destiny. He'd simply wanted to do what was right. Now, fate had placed a dragon in his hands, Rhaegar's legacy or something close to it, and he could not turn his back on it, even if it meant stepping into the crucible of conflict once more. He closed his eyes and drew a steady breath. The wind whipped across his face, salty and bracing. "I'll find a way," he murmured. Whether he spoke to himself, to the memory of his father, or to the gods, he wasn't entirely sure. But a steeled resolve filled him, akin to the tempered focus before a battle. No matter who waited in the wings, Stormland lords, cunning spy masters, or Daenerys herself, Jon would stand firm. He would not let the silver dragon fall prey to greed or fear. If the realm wanted to test his claim as a Targaryen, so be it. He had chosen this path by responding to the dragon's silent call, and he would see it through to the end. He rose, scanning the horizon once more. Nothing stirred save the gulls and the steady waves. For now, all was quiet. He turned to Ghost, who angled his head as though listening to something beyond human ears. Jon rested a hand on the wolf's fur. Together, they descended the dune, stepping back into the uneasy hush of a camp, poised on the edge of an uncertain tomorrow.